This this reserve funding plan table comes directly from the reserve study, and this is the most important table in the reserve study because it tells us exactly how much money we are supposed to contribute to the reserves to cover all the expenditures in the next 30 years. Now I'm going to briefly explain how this table works. So basically, in 2024, they did a reserve study and then they estimated all the maintenance and upgrades we need to do in the next 30 years and the estimated costs of all the projects. And then they add up all the costs for every year. And those are the numbers you see here. So as you can see, for example, in 2025, we're supposed to spend $2 million for maintenance and upgrades. And this probably include all the Gulf irrigation system. And then in 2026, you can see that we're probably supposed to spend less money on maintenance. So all the expenditures or the projects and maintenance, they include everything, including the golf course irrigation system, the golf clubhouse, pool clubhouse, roads, etc. Everything. So based on all the expenditures, they came up with this number. So in other words, in 2024, they decided that we are not contributing enough to the reserve contribution. So they decided that we need to increase our reserve contribution to this number, to $725,000 in order to cover all the expenditures. And then after that, you're only supposed to adjust this number for inflation. So as you can see, they only go up by like 3% every year. So in other words, what we're contributing before the hurricane was enough to cover all the expenditures for the next 30 years. And let me explain to you how the calculation is done. So basically, let's say we have that much money at the beginning of 2025, and then they increase our reserve contribution to $725,000 from $289,000. And then, so we contribute that much money to it, and then we earn some interest, and then we are going to spend $2 million on maintenance. So you plot that plus that plus that and minus that, and you get the reserve at the end of the year. That's the surplus, so left over for every year. And then you roll over that number to the next year, and then you contribute that much money, and then plus interest minus expenditures, and then you get a leftover. So this is how the calculation is done. And what principle do they use to determine how much money is enough and not excessive? This is the principle they use. The funding goal of this reserve study is to maintain reserves above an adequate, not excessive threshold during one or more years of significant expenditures. And this threshold funding year is 2037. As you can see, in 2037, our reserve dropped to the lowest point. And this threshold is $345,000. So basically means that as long as we can keep this number above this threshold, we're good. This is the lowest point. So we just need to keep our reserve above this threshold. And another thing is they decided that this number is enough to cover all the expenditures. That means that if we are going to make a significant adjustment to this number, then we need to recalculate this whole table because this table is the basis of this number of the reserve contribution. Okay, now let's talk about the hurricane. So now we know that we spent $1.5 million for the hurricane damages. And if we take that number into consideration, Here, for example, I basically increased the anticipated expenditures for 2025. I increased the number by $1.5 million. So if we make that change this table, and those are the numbers after the change, as you can see that our reserve will become negative by 2033, which is not good. So which means we do need to increase the reserve contribution. But the question is how much? Oh, sorry. Okay. So how much money do we need to increase to make up for the loss of the caused by the hurricane? The board decided we need to increase the reserve contribution by $263. Now, if we just add that, increase the reserve contribution by that much, we make the changes in the table, and then this table will tell us if that number makes sense. So I made the changes in this table. So I increased the expenditure by 1.5 million here, which is the hurricane cost. And then in 2023, as you can see, I increased the reserve contribution to 1.1 million basically from $725,000 after that increase, because this number is only supposed to be 750 before, but after the increase, it becomes 1 million. Okay, so everything else stayed the same. And then you basically just do the calculation in Excel. As you can see, this is the result. This is how these numbers will be like after that increase, after that $263 increase. So as you can see that at first the numbers look fine, right? But then as time goes by, as you can see, by 2036, we'll have $4 million surplus or extra at the end of this year. And they will basically just keep going up. You can see just keeps going up, keeps going up, keeps going up. And then by 2044, we'll have $10 million extra in the reserve. That's way more than what the number was in the original plan. Okay, this is the original plan. As you can see, we're only supposed to have $2 million extra in 2044, but now we got $10 million. That's way more than what we needed because as you can see on average, those are the expenditures for every year. On average, we spend like maybe 1 million every year for maintenance, but now we have 10 million extra. Clearly, that is way more than what we need. Okay, this graph gave you a bit of an idea. As you can see, this orange line shows the reserve at end of every year. As you can see, it almost remain flat. It makes sense because we don't want to have too much left over in the reserve, right? We want to have adequate but not excessive reserves. So it's supposed to maintain flat. But after that increase, after that $263 increase, this is a blue line. As you can see, the reserve just keeps going up. And this is not the end of it. After 2044, the gap will just become bigger and bigger because at this point it's way surpassed what we need. So we just keep going up. That's absurd. We don't need that much extra money. So that increase is definitely way more than we need. So exactly how much money we need, exactly how much increase we need in the reserve contribution to actually return us to our previous position. So I did a calculation and then my answer is $100. As you can see, if we increase our reserve contribution for every household by $100, for 2026, we'll contribute $865,000 to the reserve contribution instead of $750,000. And then, as you can see, by 2037, our reserve will become $518,000, which is above the threshold. Remember the threshold that I mentioned? The threshold is $345,000 determined in the original plan. See, this is the original plan, this is the threshold. As long as we can stay above this threshold, we are good. It's clearly stated in the reserve plan. The goal is to maintain the reserve above a threshold. So with $100 increase, we can keep our reserve above this threshold. So we achieved goal. That means that the increase of $100 is enough. And this graph show you that, as you can see, the orange line is the original plan, the blue line is the reserves with $100 increase. As you can see, those two lines converge, right? The blue line fall behind a little bit at the beginning, but then they caught up, and actually will keep going up. But overall, those two lines converge, which means with $100 increase, it's enough. And it makes much more sense than this line, clearly, right? This line clearly is showing that the $263 increase is way more than what we needed. So the takeaway is every time when we need to adjust the reserve contribution, we need to recalculate the whole table to make sure that the reserves stay above an adequate, not excessive threshold. And I remember that on the annual meeting when the board was presenting the budget and showing how the calculation was done, they were only looking at the next 5 years. And that's the problem. You can't only looking at the next 5 years. You have to look at the next 30 years. Because if you only look at the next 5 years, the number may look fine, but as time goes by, the number will either be not enough or too much. So you have to recalculate the whole table. So lastly, I want to briefly mention about the pool. So in the September POA board bulletin sent by the POA on September 6th, it basically stated that we have confirmed that we don't need to build a new pool to bring the whole facility up to the code. So if we don't need to build a new pool, what does that mean to our reserve contribution? I find out in the reserve study, we are expected to spend $1 million on the construction of a new pool and $1.3 million on the construction of a pool clubhouse in 2033. So that's like $2.3 million. Now, if we don't need to build a new pool, that means those two expenditures are no longer needed. Let's assume we still have to spend $800 on repairing the pool. I don't know if it's true. I'm just assuming we still need to spend some money on repairing the pool. And that will still save us $1.6 million in total. So what does that mean? As you can see, in 2033, originally, in the original plan, we're supposed to spend $3 million, which include the pool and the pool clubhouse. Now, if we can save $1.6 million, then we only need to spend $1.3 million in 2033. So with the with the hurricane, basically with the hurricane damages, which we spend $1.5 million extra. But if we can save $1.6 million in total, then we actually don't need to reserve fund fee at all for 2026. The reserve will still stay above the threshold in 2037. So as you can see, we don't increase reserve contribution. we spend extra 1.5 million here, but we spend less we spend $1.6 million less in 2023, 2033, and our reserve fund can still stay above the threshold, which means we actually don't need increase the reserve contribution at all if we actually don't need to build a pool.